Welcome everyone to this event, Understanding Sustainalytics ESG Rating. My name is Alexander Ebolo. I'm the Cluster Lead ESG Risk Management at Kirchhoff Consult. And I'll be your host today for this event. And with me from Sustainalytics, I have Charity Blue, who is Director of Product Management at Sustainalytics with about almost 10 years at Sustainalytics. And then I also have Casey, who is Head of Methodology and Research Oversight at Sustainalytics. And I also used to be an ESG rating analyst at Sustainalytics. And together we're going to try to give you a better understanding of your ESG risk rating. So this is an event for you, for companies, for issuers, so that you can walk away from this meeting with a better understanding of your ratings and how you can better position your organization in terms of ESG risk rating. So in terms of how the event today is structured, so this an overview of the structure. We're going to take the first couple of minutes to introduce you to the topic we're discussing today, sort of like the framework and background. And then we're going to hear directly from Sustainalytics, and they're going to speak to the ESG risk ratings, methodology and insights, and how they engage with corporates. And then we're going to move on to the consulting side for Kirchhoff and understand how through disclosure and communication, companies can effectively position themselves. In between, we're going to have a poll. Like I said, this is an event that is organized for you to, on the one hand, to better understand your experiences with the ESG risk rating, and on the other hand, to also give you a better understanding of the process from an insider perspective. So we're going to have a poll where we are going to ask you a couple of questions. When it's time, the questions are going to pop up on your screen, and then you should choose the option that best applies to your situation and your organization. And then we're going to wrap up with a Q&A. So you can use the chat function on your screen to drop your questions. I would encourage you not to wait until the end before you drop your questions. You can already do that during the event as they occur or come to mind. So I'm just going to move on. I already introduced myself and the speakers, which we also have from Sustainalytics. So before we go into the nitty-gritty of the ratings, the ESG risk rating itself, I just want to point out that ESG risk ratings or ESG ratings in general play key roles in the investment decisions and for whether a company is going to be invested in by corporate institutional investors. So according to this study, we see that ESG ratings, based on data from 2024, ranks the top among 10 factors considered, and then followed closely by ESG controversies. So the EU Green Bond Standard is also another factor. So we've seen that ESG risk rating play a very decisive role in terms of investment decision making. And then for companies, what does that mean? It's a tool for enhancing reputation, for mitigating risk, and also for differentiating yourself among the competition. So these are just a snapshot of the benefits for companies. And so before I hand over to Casey to take us through the methodology, I just want to point out that so this ESG backlash. This is politically charged or a very sensitive topic since 2025. But in the midst of all that, the core of what ESG represents hasn't changed. Maybe the hype is tapering off, but then the substance is still there. And ESG is a tool that can be used for managing risk and for meeting fiduciary duty. And if you are a company that is active in Europe, you can also see that the regulations are not going away. The regulatory requirements are not going away. So this is something that every organization who wants to manage risk and also become resilient for the future, they need to ensure that they stay true to the course of ESG. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Casey, who is going to give us a walk through the methodology and other insights.
Yes, thank you, Alexander, and hello to everyone on the call. I'm Casey, and as Alexander mentioned, I'll be speaking about Morningstar Sustainalytics ESG Risk Rating methodology, which, as you can see on the next slide, as you can see here, Sustainalytics ESG risk ratings measure the degree to which a company's enterprise value is at risk, driven by ESG factors. Now, the first thing to know about the ESG risk rating on the next slide is that it has two key dimensions. So first, we look at exposure, or how vulnerable a company is to different ESG issues based on its industry and its business model. Then we look at management. So by that, I mean, how effectively is the company managing those risks through its policies, programs, practices, and lack of controversies. So it's not enough to just have low exposure or strong practices. We're always evaluating the interaction between these two dimensions. And this combination between exposure and management is ultimately what determines the level of ESG risk that a company faces. Now we can break this down further into the core building blocks of the rating. The ESG risk ratings are built on three key building blocks, which you can see here. So the first is the foundation, which is corporate governance and stakeholder governance. And we treat these issues as foundational issues across all companies, which reflects our conviction that strong governance is essential to long-term value creation. And that means that these issues are material for all companies, regardless of their industry, and we only differentiate exposure to these issues based on public or private status. Then we have the material ESG issues, or MEIs. These are defined at the sub-industry level. And so they reflect the ESG risks that are most relevant for companies operating in a particular space. And this is how we establish a company's baseline exposure after the foundational issues of corporate governance and stakeholder governance. And then thirdly, we have the idiosyncratic and systemic events. These are the more unpredictable elements, so things like controversies or incidents that are not necessarily tied to the company's business model, but can still significantly impact risk. These are rare, but they can be impactful when they occur. So when you combine these three different elements, you get a complete picture of both expected and unexpected drivers of ESG risk. And here you can see the material ESG issues that we track. Some of the most frequently material ESG issues include business ethics, product governance, and human capital. Of course, we also track less frequently material ESG issues like ESG integration for financials, human rights in the supply chain, or access to basic services. One important note about the material ESG issues is that materiality is industry specific. So for example, carbon emissions might be highly material for an energy company, while data privacy is going to be much more critical for a technology firm. And that, of course, is why a one-size-fits-all ESG approach doesn't work. we tailor the assessment based on what actually matters for each sub-industry. And we track around 140 sub-industries. So for each sub-industry material ESG issue combination, we assess both exposure and management, and then we allow for things like analyst overlays or disabling based on company-specific factors. So now that we've talked about what we measure, we can get more into how the scoring actually works, which you can see here on this slide. We start with a company's exposure to material ESG issues, which we get by adding up the exposure to each individual material ESG issue that we've identified. And this is the baseline. From there, we distinguish between unmanageable risk and manageable risk. And this is because some risks we believe are simply unmanageable due to things like technological limitations, human error, and other unpredictable factors. So these are considered unmanageable, and we subtract these from the starting exposure score through a discount factor. We then look at the manageable portion of risk, and this is really where management quality matters. So a company can reduce its risk through strong policies, programs, and systems, and we assess this through our management score for each material ESG issues. But in most cases, not all of that risk, of course, is fully mitigated. And the portion that remains is what we call the management gap or unmanaged risk. And this is the key point. Our ESG risk ratings are focused on unmanaged ESG risk. This is ultimately what feeds into the final score and the associated risk category of negligible, low, medium, high, or severe risk. And now if we can go to the next slide, we can take a look at how we ensure that our ratings stay up to date. So our research process combines both regular updates and event-driven updates. We typically update each company's rating once per year based on updated company reporting. Corporate reporting, including things like annual reports, sustainability reports, and relevant company policies and documents. This is the main source of information for the majority of our assessment. Each update goes through multiple steps. So we have the data collection and analysis, quality and peer review, company feedback, and then finally committee approval. Now, at the same time, we also have ongoing daily monitoring for news and incidents, so that if something significant happens, like a controversy or a major event, we can assess and incorporate that information quickly. And we follow a similar process for events-driven updates. Including things like peer review, company feedback, and committee approval in case of a material rating change. So now we can go to how we ensure consistency and quality across the process. Here you can see some information about our quality assurance. Quality and integrity, of course, are critical for a framework like this. So we've built in multiple layers of oversight into the process. First of all, every rating goes through an internal peer review. We also have oversight committees that review significant rating changes to ensure consistency and methodological alignment. Importantly, companies also have the opportunity to provide feedback, particularly to correct any factual errors. And then on top of that, we run automated quality checks to flag any unusual changes or outliers in the data. And then finally, we also have formal processes for testing, validation, tracking client feedback or complaints. We also review our methodologies on an annual basis. Of course, a lot of this is, we've been providing more transparency, significantly more transparency as we prepare to register with ESMA later this year. So overall, there's a very strong emphasis on ensuring that the ratings are robust, consistent, and transparent. Now, I'd like to close with a few important features of the ESG risk ratings. So first of all, we classify companies across 5 risk categories, ranging from negligible to severe. Each company's ESG risk score corresponds to one of these risk categories. Secondly, this is a measure of absolute risk, which means that ratings are comparable across industries and can be aggregated at the portfolio level. We have a broad coverage with more than 16,000 companies globally. And then from an access perspective, the ratings are available through multiple channels, including things like data feeds and platforms. And then finally, everything is grounded, of course, in the structured methodology with 22 material ESG issues, hundreds of indicators, and many more underlying data points that are feeding each rating. So again, overall, the goal is to provide a rigorous, scalable, and decision-useful view of ESG risk. And with that, I will hand it over to Charity to discuss our issuer feedback processes.
Great, thank you, Casey. So if we go to the next slide here, I just wanted to quickly touch on how you can engage in our ratings update process. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the way that there's 3 ways to engage with us in the research updates that we provide for our ratings products, which includes the ESG risk rating. The first one, and I saw a question in the chat about updating operational procedures as a result of the impending regulations that are taking place in Europe. And this first engagement is the requirement that is put together by our European regulation that we will be aligning with, that has us reach out to companies that will be receiving a rating for the first time. So what that essentially means is if your company has never received a rating in the past across our suite of ratings products, so not limited to just the ESG risk rating, we will proactively reach out to individuals at your organization for an opt-in process to be able to provide feedback prior to your rating being published publicly. So it's a 1-week opt-in schedule and then 2 weeks in total to provide feedback to us, which allows us to basically fact check and make sure that you're able to review everything we were able to collect about your company and what's been publicly disclosed to support your rating. And if there's anything that may have been missed in that process, or if you want to comment on anything, then you are able to engage with us in that way. The second one is the annual update process. So for those that have been covered for some time and are covered under what we call our comprehensive methodology, you have that same opportunity to engage with us on an annual basis as your rating is updated. So it looks the same as the first time pre-issuance feedback process, where you're able to, again, focus on fact checking, making sure that all publicly available documentation that you have that can support your rating is incorporated into the end rating. And then the last one is the post full update feedback process, where you can log into the issuer gateway and then be able to provide feedback after your rating's been published publicly if you notice any sort of error in that. So what that essentially allows you to do is comment on any indicators and say, here's a policy that you might not have captured, and do that retroactively at your convenience. So there's no timetable for this. There's no requirement to engage in any of these processes, but it essentially allows for you, if there was something you want to comment on after the rating's been published, then ad hoc at your convenience, you can comment on that, and we will take those and then be able to provide updates to the rating if they meet our methodology expectations. So if we go to the next slide, I wanted to just talk about the usefulness of using the ESG risk rating in corporate workflows, and then provide some resources for you all across our business. So there's a few ways that we see that corporate sustainability teams in particular can use the ESG risk rating. I actually used to oversee Morningstar's corporate sustainability reporting program, and these were all ways that we were able to take the data and information provided through Sustainalytics' risk rating and other data products to be able to help inform our strategy. The first is supporting materiality. So being able to utilize the indicators in the subject areas that Morningstar Sustainalytics believes to be material to your business are a great starting place to assess your financial materiality for your organization and set up that process for you. It's a research-backed way to basically be able to provide that evidence as to why you believe that the different topics that you should be focused on are in fact material to your business. It also is a helpful tool for performance benchmarking against peers. So through some of our software capabilities, you're able to assess how well you're performing not only in your ESG risk rating at that top line level, but also in various topical areas across the board, being able to understand how you're performing against peers. So in things like your carbon emissions strategy, aspects of your diversity program, you're able to use our data to help understand how you're performing, which can then, of course, also help inform your strategic development. So if there's areas that you want to focus on improving, being able to understand the indicator criteria that we are grading companies on allows for you to be able to make those changes in your business strategy related to sustainability, communicate outcomes with your executive team, and manage your strategy from there. This is also a helpful tool in terms of communication. So companies in particular, if you're proud of the rating that you get, you're doing better than your peer group, it's a great opportunity to use that in discussion with investors, as well as other stakeholders that are interested in understanding how well you're performing from a sustainability standpoint. And then, of course, it's a natural way for internal alignment and making sure stakeholders understand how you're performing across the board. So if we go to the next slide, there's a few resources available to you completely for free. So our Sustainalytics Issuer Gateway is our platform that allows for all covered organizations to be able to engage with us in the research update process and can download information about their own ESG risk rating and other products that you are covered by completely for free. We do not charge for this information. So you're able to log in at that web page to the Issuer Gateway. And if you don't have a login for this for your organization, you can reach out to our issuer relations team at the email posted here to be able to get access to that. But essentially what it allows you to do is receive your full ESG risk rating report completely for free and also dig into the details of any of the other ratings products that we offer. And then we do have corporate offerings that we do sell into the marketplace, which are focused on three key areas. The first one being our ESG data that we provide to corporate issuers via our Global Access platform, which allows you access to 5 different data suites that span different subject areas like low carbon transition, as well as being able to monitor controversies and involvement areas in the value chain. So being able to get access to these data suites across our full coverage of all companies that are covered by these products can help you benchmark your performance, support your sustainability strategy, and also, again, monitor those risks across your supply chain. And then there's 2 kind of communication tools that we provide. The first being a distribution license, where again, if you're very proud of your ESG risk rating, you're performing quite well, being able to purchase the right to position that IP on your sustainability reports and websites to communicate that with stakeholders. And then on an annual basis, we do celebrate companies that receive the best ESG risk ratings across global, regional, and industry peer groups. So for companies that are eligible for these top leader badges, meaning that they're doing incredibly well compared to the rest of our universe, you can again purchase the right to position these awards on your public materials to communicate proactively with investors and other stakeholders. So then if you go to our next slide here, if you're interested in learning more about any of our corporate sustainability solutions that we offer to the marketplace, please feel free to either reach out to myself or our Sustainalytics sales team here that you can see the email here. And with that, I think I will go ahead and pass it back for us to start Q&A. Or I'm sorry, for Alexander to speak on his points here.
Thank you, Charity. So, thank you everyone for listening so far. You've been hearing our voices, Alexander, Casey, Charity. We've been talking about the Sustainalytics ESG risk rating. So at this point, we're going to make a little detour for a couple of minutes and hear your voice. We would like you to respond to so a couple of questions are going to be popping up on your screen. So we want to take a poll. We want to understand your objectives and other priorities and focus areas for your ESG risk rating. So we have 3 questions. They are up on your screen. If you can select your responses and then we can move to the next one, and then also to the next one. So 3 questions. The first being, what's your organization's primary objective for your next Sustainalytics ESG risk rating? So here we have the majority, 63%, saying they want to enhance their reputation from a stakeholder perspective, while also about a quarter of respondents want to move from one risk rating category to the other. So stepping up the ladder, if you will. So we're going to move on to the next one, which is, what area of your current ESG score would you like to better understand or improve? So you can click on your responses in the next couple of seconds. Again, like I said, it's about giving us insights into your unique situation and how you would also like to strategize and position your ESG risk rating. So here it's a bit more nuanced. We have a tie between more votes are slightly more votes are going for policies and policy structures that are examined through the rating indicators. So this sort of like gives us a hint into the areas of focus, areas where corporates and companies would like to better understand. And then, of course, KPIs that are also being assessed. And then to the final question, where in the rating cycle does your team tend to spend the most focus or resources? Like Casey explained in detail, the rating methodology and also the processes where you also have the opportunity to engage or do research or report your sustainability performance. So which of these would be where you spend the most focus or resources? And looking at the results that are trickling in, at this moment, 57% says mapping internal data to specific indicators. So again, we see this indicator popping up in terms of policies and structures, and also the data that will be mapped to specific indicators and those assessment criteria. So with this, we have insights from you, the audience, and thank you very much for your participation in the polls and also giving us a point as to the areas where your organizations would like to focus more, and what they would like to see in terms of outcome and the use of the ratings from the stakeholder perspective. So moving on now, So what we're going to spend the next 15 minutes talking about is the approach. We're going to talk about the approach of Kirchhoff Consults in their interaction with companies, and also give you a pointer to how disclosure and communication practices can better position your company, your organization in terms of ESG ratings. And then we're going to leave the last, we're going to dedicate the last 15 minutes of this session to answering the questions that you may have. Also to point out that if we do not get to your question, do not be worried. We're going to provide a written response to your question specifically that will be delivered to your email box. So it's important that you continue to drop your questions. We're going to take those that we can within the limits of time that are available. Otherwise, we will respond to everyone's question. So what disclosure practices that organizations can target for their ESG ratings? So quickly, I'm just going to run through some principles for effective positioning of your ESG rating. And this triple strategy is visibility. You want to structure your policies, and there were also questions or responses in the polls about policies. Again, we know that that is a focus area for a lot of companies. A lot of you here chose that option. So policies and your reports, and that's such that they can be aligned with the rating, the methodology, and the model. So that is one way to make your to position yourself to become more visible, because you're being assessed based on your disclosures. That's just it. Publicly available disclosure. What do you have on your website? What policies speak to specific indicators? And then comparability. So we also heard about peer comparability. So you want to also have those KPIs that are determined to be necessary for assessing your performance relative to your peers. And then you also want to have a proactive approach to ESG ratings. So what we see is that a lot of organizations, they have sort of a reactive approach. So reactive in the sense that, okay, maybe they get an email from the rating agency that they had to comment, and then maybe there are not enough resources, or they feel this is not a priority for the organization. But what that could mean is that it could be compromising your position in terms of losing out on the benefits that a better positioning can create for your organization. So moving on from there, we're going to talk briefly about how you can use effective communication to also enhance your organization value. Again, as pointed in the beginning, one of the benefits of ESG ratings for your organization is the ability to use it for enhancement of your reputation. So the key message here is that in terms of your ESG risk rating, you have to prioritize governance, because governance is like the main pillar. Yes, there is E and S and G, but everything sort of builds up on governance. So if you get the governance right, a lot of things are going to be the natural consequence, I would say. Also, transparency. So you want to structure your organization in terms of practices and disclosures such that there will be transparency. So whatever commitments you're making, this will be in the public space, and then you can be held accountable if needs arise. So, and that is why a lot of the rating agencies have moved away from internal documentation to what is publicly available, so that you're not saying one thing internally and then you're doing something else. So in terms of governance, you want to ensure that sustainability, ESG, is part of your organizational strategy. You want to also make sure that there are clear roles and responsibilities at the management and the board level. And also some other ancillary issues in governance here. You can see that the focus is actually on governance, and there are also studies that have shown that the governance pillar is the most significant enhancer of corporate value. So how you also go into the corporate governance part of things, long-term and short-term incentives, and also compensation levels and other ways to manage and mitigate controversies. When I pointed out in the beginning, the factors that investors really care about to drive their investment decisions. We saw ESG risk ratings as the first, and then the second was also ESG controversies. So, and then when you're looking at the benefits like enhancement of reputation, controversy is the surefire way to impair the reputation of an organization. So you want to make sure you are proactive in these issues. And then moving on to materiality assessment. We also heard from Casey about materiality or material ESG issues when it comes to Sustainalytics. So materiality assessment, we all know a lot of organizations and people who are responsible for sustainability topics in organizations know about the EU regulations like the CSRD, and then the concept of double materiality. So, but when people do these assessments in terms of what is material to us based on our business model, there is a checklist, if you say, of issues under regulation, but then you also want to incorporate what the indicators or what are the material issues of the company based on the ESG risk rating. So one of the use cases that Charity also mentioned was in terms of incorporating your ESG risk rating into your double materiality analysis. And this is something that we've seen that a lot of companies do not do. So, and if you do this proactively, it's going to play a role on what policies. Again, linking your feedback from the polls, where you talk about the challenges of mapping policies to the indicators. So if you incorporate your ESG risk rating, what indicators you have, and your material ESG issues into your double materiality assessment, what you're going to see is that it's going to change. It's going to influence the policies you create. It's going to change. It's going to impact your roles and responsibilities you assign. It's also going to play a role on the depth and the granularity of your materiality assessment. So what this means is that companies shouldn't limit their performance of materiality assessment to the minimum regulatory requirement. Like I always say, regulatory requirements from an ESG risk rating perspective provides the floor. So although you are not required to go beyond this minimum, but you should know that to become more comparable with your peer, to become a leader in your industry and be able to get one of those badges that Charity talked about, you need to go beyond that minimum regulatory requirement. And then also consider the nuances of your sub-industry and what material issues are applicable. So yeah, talking about create, measure, and disclose. So the create component of this trifecta is that you want to make sure that whatever you do, you do not just focus on the rating outcomes, so to speak. You want to make sure you are creating those policies. You want to make sure that you're also implementing them. So you have these initiatives and you have other performances that are meant to implement those policies. So when you have mapped your materiality, you have created your policies, and how do you communicate them to the outside world so that the analysts and others who are looking at this disclosure from your company, they can actually see the true story, which is not just aimed at acing ratings, but also a genuine commitment that is backed by evidence that you are actually committed to ESG, and that's what your organization is doing in terms of creating value for stakeholders, that you're also incorporating this as part of your business model to ensure, again, remember that ESG is a tool for risk management. So to talk about idiosyncrasies and others risks that you may not be able to anticipate. So it gives you a framework for this forward-looking approach to sustainability and ensuring that your company continues to maintain a going concern. So the final step we're going to look at is what is Kirchhoff's approach when we, so here, again, the focus is on how you can understand your risk rating. So how do we work with companies? You've heard directly from Charity and Casey, Sustainalytics, in terms of the methodology, but we also see that as we can also observe from your questions and your poll responses, that a lot of companies still need a partner to work with them as they go through this process. So what we do here is basically divided into 6 work streams. So we have in the beginning defining a strategy for your ESG risk rating. So there are a lot of organizations with multiple ratings, credit ratings, ESG ratings, and then we have this rating landscape that's maybe not so easy to navigate. So we come work with you to define, to look at what should your focus be on and what issues should your organization focus on. And then from there, we do a status quo analysis. We want to look at where you are at the moment. And then we map where you are with what the requirements are. So then we can see this gap in the third stage. So after defining a clear strategy for your rating, looking at your status quo, and then looking at the gaps in terms of comparing your status quo to the requirements, then we can now move on to the value creation phase. And this value creation phase is where you begin to go into not just making commitments, but actually implementing those commitments and ensuring that you create value that are measurable and supported by actual efforts and evidence. And then in the 5th phase, we go to the communication strategy. So you've done all this work. How do you effectively communicate them? Like I mentioned, again, this is dependent on what you put out there. So if it's just lying within your organization, well, they don't see it, they don't take it into account. You cannot even decide to make it available to just the rating agency. It has to be available to all stakeholders. And that is also part of the regulation of the rating industry that will be effective this month. And then also from communication, continuous engagement. So when you go through the whole process, for a lot of you, Charity also talked about the initial cycle and then the annual update. So it's not a one-time event. So this is something that is a continuous process, and the requirements are also changing. The methodology is changing. Developments in society is also changing. So you want to make sure that you don't just create, for example, a policy and then in 5 years there are no updates that incorporate the recent developments. So you want to make sure you are always taking in feedback from your rating and also feedback from other stakeholders and incorporating them into your policies, into your processes and your systems. So this is our process. And in the end, for organizations, what we see is that you can go from the resources you commit, the investment, and sometimes the difficulty in trying to sell to the board or the management that they need to invest in ESG and sustainability. So you can go from ESG just being a cost center to actual delivering value for your organization, where they now have access to lower cost of capital, for example, lower cost of fund, or being included in sustainability linked funds. So these are some of the values that can be delivered to your organization when you pay attention to repositioning or better positioning your organization. So I would wrap up by this set of quotes that ESG, if executed with discipline and operational relevance, financial discipline, can be a lever for value creation. and creates long-term growth and value for organizations. So we're going to go into the Q&A in a second. I just want to point out to all our attendees that we can, so part of the work streams, I showed you a couple of slides earlier, that we can also work with your organization to do a discounted rating gap analysis, where we look at your status quo and then analyze the gaps. And then from there, you can see how far you are and what gaps need to be closed, what your organization needs to know to better position for the ESG rating. So with that, feel free to send me an email, to contact me after this session.